welcome Dr. Temple Grandin.
It's really great to be here today. We're going to talk about a lot of different things. I was one of those kids that was kind of different growing up, bullied and teased in school. Well, and the thing that saved me was my science teacher. I had a great science teacher that got me interested in doing all kinds of interesting projects, which brings it down to, if you want to get kids doing interesting stuff, you're going to have to show them interesting stuff. There's a scene on the HBO movie where I got really interested in optical illusion rooms. Well, and I actually saw that optical illusion room on a Bell Labs 16 millimeter movie. Now I'm showing how long ago that was, on optical illusions. So, got to get them out there and show them stuff. Now, the thing is, what I want to do is to get you thinking about different kinds of minds that think differently. When I was in 20s, 30s, and early 40s, I thought everybody thought the same way that I think. And then I asked this question, and this is where I learned how thinking can be different. Access your memory on a church steeple. How does that information come into your mind? I was shocked to find out that a lot of people get this vague generalized thing. I don't have any vague generalized thing. I only have specific ones. Now you might ask, why am I talking about church steeples? Why don't I ask house or car? Well, most people are so familiar with their own home, with their own car, that they're going to see that. But I wanted to ask you something you don't own, but they're out there and you have to see them. And everybody knows what they are. And you have to see a whole lot of them. You just can't even drive around without seeing them. And that really started giving me some real insight that different people think differently. So then I divided the world kind of into people that think in words and people that think in pictures. And then I started to, wait a minute, this is other kind of person that kind of thinks in patterns. This is more the mathematical kind of mind. Now, when does something become an abnormality? You get a little bit of the autism trait. You take out some social stuff in the brain, and you get geek traits for all kinds of fun tech stuff. I think a brain can either be made more cognitive or more thinking, or a brain can be made more social. Because after all, who invented the first stone spear? It wasn't the yak-yaks around the campfire, that's for sure. It was some geek out there in the back of the cave chipping away at a rock and figured out how to get it fastened to a stick and make a stone spear. You see, you get a little bit of that kind of autism trait, you get some advantages. You get too much of the trait, you get a very, very severe handicap. Because one of the big problems you've got with the autism spectrum is it's so huge. At one end, you've got a lot of people, probably people like Tesla, who invented the power plant. You've got a lot of people in Silicon Valley. There's a lot of them that are live. I don't talk about live ones. I'm only going to talk about dead ones when I show their pictures. You know who all the live ones are. You can look them up in Business Week magazine, and it's really, really obvious. But you get a little bit of, you get the creative people. Well, yeah, there tends to be relatives of people that may have bipolar disorder. There's more techies in the autism careers. Now, the thing is, an autism diagnosis is not precise. And over the years, they've kept changing the diagnosis. In the early 90s, they put in Asperger's, where now just geeks and nerds with no speech delay become autistic. Then in 2013, they took that out. So now you got this great big mucky autism diagnosis that goes from heads of Silicon Valley companies down to people that remain nonverbal and cannot dress themselves. So you've got this huge spectrum. Okay, maybe that's heresy that I put his picture up here, but I promised that I would only talk about dead ones and stuff I could dig off of publicly available things like a very popular book that's out now. Now, the thing I want to get you to think about is what would happen to little Albert today? Little Albert Einstein. He had no language until he was 3 years old. Wasn't very social, liked to line up blocks. He'd probably be labeled autistic spectrum today. Little Stevie. Oh, weird loner. This is right out of publicly available information. A weird loner that brought snakes to his elementary school and turned them loose. And then he was bullied and teased. And what saved him was getting out in the neighborhood computer club. This brings up a really important thing, getting these teenagers that are kind of different. Now today they're getting addicted to video games, sometimes getting addicted to video games and get an autism diagnosis and get paid Social Security to play video games. Yeah, people say, well, I'm too much down on video games. Well, I was just down at JPL yesterday, and if you want to work at JPL all day and play video games at night, I don't have a problem with that. What I'm getting concerned about is the kid that's getting addicted to video games and they're not getting a job at JPL. That concerns me very, very much. And so he was bullied, and then when he went to work for Atari, he was such a filthy slob, they made him come in at night. No, being a filthy slob's not okay. And there's a scene in the movie where they slammed down the deodorant and they said, you stink, use it. That actually happened. This is where, this is where bosses are going to just have to, give some instruction on how to behave at work. And being an absolutely filthy, dirty slob, I don't think is going to be very acceptable here either. It's just too gross. Now, I like to look at personality differences, sort of like a music mixing board. It's not black and white. Like if I get a diagnosis for tuberculosis, that's definite. I either got tuberculosis or I don't. Or I've either had tuberculosis or I didn't. So when I check the Australian customs form, which I did 2 months ago, I can check I have never had tuberculosis. That's definite. When you see autism, it's, that's a much more gray area. Geeks and nerds, when does that turn into mild autism? No black and white dividing line. It's a continuous trait. And if you got rid of this trait completely, you won't have any new employees. It's just that simple. Now, I am a total visual thinker. I think in photorealistic pictures. I don't think in words. So when I think about designing something, I can test run it and see it in my head in 3D. Before 3D virtual reality computer programs were invented, I could sit in a conference room and they could sort of like try stuff and they say, well, yeah, if you do that, that's not going to work. And you might wonder, why is the chute curved? Well, as the cattle come on around the bend, they think they're going back to where they came from. And that's one of the reasons, why that works. I'm always get asked all the time questions like, do cows know they're going to get slaughtered? I had to answer that question very early in my career. And I found they behaved exactly the same way at a slaughter plant as they behaved going up a chute for the veterinarian. It's not stress-free, but the amount of stress they have in both of those places is approximately the same. In fact, I just updated that literature for my class slides, and it's still the same. They do blood samples in both places. Yeah, it can vary from very little stress to higher stress, but it's about the same in the two different places. Well, when you're a weird geek, one of the things I found is that the way that I had to sell myself was by showing off my work. You sell your work rather than yourself. So I put portfolios together. Okay, I'd say the quality of this projector is about medium good. I've had ones where it showed up better than this. Now, the thing is, when I first started out, I'd go to the ag engineering meeting, and they thought I was really, weird. No one wanted to talk to me. And then I whipped out a big fold-out drawing. Then I started to get respect. That's selling your work. And the thing I learned about my portfolio, is you want to make a portfolio where someone looks at it, and 30 seconds later, it's wow. Don't put too much junk in a portfolio. You just put enough stuff in there, so look at it really quickly. Wow, this person really has some, really can do some stuff. Now, I used to joke around that I had huge internet access to my visual cortex. Well, it turns out I've got a pretty big circuit there. And that's probably in the top 10% or so of circuits in the, going from the frontal cortex all the way deep to the back of the visual cortex where the graphics files are stored. Now, Walter Schneider at the University of Pittsburgh has a new scanning technology, which I'm sure some Asperger people had to develop the computer to enable this scanner to track white matter fibers. So your brain's got the gray matter on the outside, and the inside of the brain's all white matter, big long axons that go all the way across the brain that form cable bundles. And this new technology can actually dissect out the cable bundles. It can tell the difference between a bridge, they cross each other, or an intersection. That took a lot of computer power. and they can fit it inside a box that Walter can pick up. And so I'm an associative thinker, so I start thinking about that song, you can get 8 great tomatoes on that itty-bitty can. That's an ancient old ad for tomato sauce. So that came up. You can get lots of computing in an itty-bitty box. That's sort of how my mind works. Okay, now this is the cable bundle for speak what you see. And it goes from the visual cortex up to the language area. That's the normal one. And that's mine. And those branches, you can see they've been truncated there on that rendering. They actually go all over the brain. So I basically have got a search engine, it's a lot like Google for Images, where you type in keywords and I get lots of pictures. And they are specific. The thing I find so fascinating about search engines is they work just like how my mind works. Well, who made it search engines? Some people that are much more linear in their thinking don't like the way the search engine works. I like the way it works just fine. And one of the things I got to teach my students is you got to use all the different keywords. All right, let's just take cattle, for example. There's bulls, cows, cattle, bovines, calves. You got to use all those different words. That's really obvious to me. And I find if you use all the different words, you find a lot of papers you wouldn't find otherwise. Now, the price I paid for this circuit is I have less bandwidth for the speak what you see. So I had speech delay, didn't talk until age 4, and I couldn't get my words out. See, there's always a price. This scanner was originally paid for by the Defense Department to look at veterans' head injuries. And if this had been an injured circuit, it would look like dried spaghetti. I broke about half of them. I'll tell you, the football players doesn't look very pretty. Okay, now this is another scan that's done at the University of Utah and presented at the neuroscience meeting. And the blue part is basically full of cerebral spinal fluid. It's full of water. And you can see I've got a big asymmetry there. I got visual thinking and my math department got trashed. See, where I think innate differences make the biggest difference is either a real deficit in something or an extreme ability in something. Yes, there's brain plasticity, but that's happening in the gray matter out on the edges. Those big white fiber bundles, I don't think you grow those big axons back. I mean, they're that long. Okay. Malcolm Gladwell says if you have enough practice and you have enough access to services, anyone can learn anything. Well, back in '68, Bill Gates and I had access to this exact same computer system. I wanted to learn how to program it. It was just hopeless. Algebra, just hopeless. I wanted to become an expert skier. I could never keep them together. I could get to the good intermediate stage. I mean, I could ski recreationally, but get really good. There were other kids, one winner. They'd be experts. Well, I just couldn't do computer programming, no matter how hard I tried. I agree with Gladwell about the practice, and of course the access to, to the teaching. You have to develop abilities. This is probably one of my most important slides, the different kinds of minds slide. I am a photorealistic visual thinker, an object visualizer. A lot of people in programming are a pattern visualizer, a spatial visualizer. See, in your brain, you have circuits for what is something. That's me. And then you've got circuits for where is something. And people that are super good at the where is something, like located in space, tend to not be so good at the object visualization. And the visuals, the pattern thinkers are also often good at math. These kids often have trouble with reading. I hear stories where, they're having handwriting problems. They won't let them type on a laptop. That's just stupid. Another thing that I hear that's really bad, political correctness gone crazy, is you've got a 4th grader bored doing baby math, and they make them do baby math, and they don't give them the more advanced book. That's just ridiculous. You can get into a situation where a kid may be gifted in math, but needs special ed in reading. Now, I like to bust out of the silos. Everybody tends to get inside their own box. Okay, there's a tech box, there's a farm and ranch box, there's a gifted box, and there's an autism box, or silos. And I kind of like pick out my speaking engagements, so I like to get a little mixture of all these different things. because I'm seeing something that kind of disturbs me. I go to an autism meeting, and a geeky little 10-year-old walks up to me, a real smart little 10-year-old, and he's fixated on his autism. And sometimes they get kind of a handicap mentality, and they're not learning basic stuff like saying please and thank you. You know, learning just, you know, basic skills, kind of get overprotected. Then I go to a gifted meeting, the same little geeky kid comes up to me, but he wants to tell me about what he saw under the Brock Magiscope, which is a really cool little children's microscope. And then I go to a place like this, all full of undiagnosed, little bit on the spectrum. Avoid the labels like the plague, because it might hold you back. Now, where learning about autism can really help some of you guys here is in your relationships. You don't need to go out and get diagnosed, but just reading about it, that can help you out. And then I go over to the farm and ranch in the meat world, and I go to this big, huge meatpacking plant. And there's this old gray-haired hippie, and he runs the maintenance shop. And he's out there playing with the giant Legos, putting up a new cooler, big, huge concrete Legos. He uses the crane to put them up. And he's pure spectrum, but he had welding in high school. One of the worst things they've done in the high schools is taken out the hands-on classes. In fact, at JPL, they make all the metal parts of something like the Mars lander. They make them there in shops. And they're having problems finding, who's going to replace the machinists, when they retire. Now, a third kind of thinker is the verbal facts thinker. They know everything about whatever their favorite subject is, and they're a verbal thinker. Now, so-called normal people, they are mixtures of these different kinds of thinking. But I'm finding when you get into autism programs, there's an awful lot of smart kids that ought to get headed down a track towards Google or JPL, that the teachers in the schools are having a hard time shifting gears on how to deal with the nonverbal kids, and they got smart, geeky kids in that same class. It's a really, really big problem. Because I can think of kids I went to school with when I was in college that I know are on the spectrum today. But the problem that the parents of little kids have and the schools have, in order to get a service, you have to have a label. Now, I don't think it hurts a kid when he's 3 to put a label on him to get speech therapy. But then you get the kid that's like 10 or 12 years old getting bullied in school, and he gets a label because he's getting bullied in school. And Steve Jobs was one of the kids who they had to take him out of one school, put him over in another school in Cupertino, and fortunately he had a dad that had a machine shop. That was another thing that was his salvation. He was doing hands-on things. Now, I know that Steve Jobs may not be the best thing to be mentioning here, but I only can talk about the dead ones where I have information I've gotten off of publicly available things like books and Business Week magazine, which I've read carefully. Now, in the Autistic Brain book, I now show evidence that these two kinds of visualizers actually do exist. Today the schools are all about evidence-based. Well, Marie Kozanoff's work. Surfing the internet, 3 o'clock in the morning, I found her stuff about the two kinds of visualizers. This PET brain scan study showed that these two kinds of visualizers exist. I was so happy when I found this, because I had just observed these things just on my own. And when I did my TED Talk, I hadn't found these references yet. They weren't very easy to find. There's kind of a bias about innate ability. No, everyone's not the same. Yes, there's a lot of plasticity. You got a lot of people here in the middle. You can get them pretty good at programming up to here or whatever, but you probably won't get them to here. They can move back and forth in the middle. The gray matter's got a lot of plasticity. But then you got these great big huge white matter cables. Well, you're kind of born with those things. Okay, there's two ways you can do the math. You can do it the verbal way, or you can do it the more visual spatial way. And there's kids that can just do the math in their head. The school says, well, you can't do that. They don't get it that he thinks differently. Well, I'm saying let him do it in his head. But we will take some precautions against cheating. So we're going to put him in a room stripped of everything electronic, and if he can do it, then just absolutely fine. Now I just want to show you something that's definitely not my mind. That praying mantis is made out of a single sheet of folded paper. No cutting, no tape. And what you see in the background, that is the folding pattern. And people look at that and go, wow. Well, there's no way I could start with a square piece of paper and make it into a praying mantis. That's not my mind. And here are some great little origami stars that some kids gave me. They need to be in the advanced math class. Now, my thing was art. And when I was in elementary school, my ability in art was always encouraged. And I was encouraged to do lots of different things. So I wasn't just drawing the same horse head over and over again. You got to take the things they're fixated on and broaden it out, because you've got to learn how to do stuff other people are going to want. Always like to show my drawings off again. And here's a beautiful bridge that Jessie Park drew. She was kind of more moderate. Well, her favorite thing used to be electric blanket controls. We had to get her off of that. And while on the subject of bridges, I think our governments are going crazy when you've got a governor and his aides are deliberately creating traffic jams on a bridge, the one that looks just like this. This is absolutely ridiculous. They're getting totally separated from reality. You know, we have great things going on with private industry docking with the space station, but instead we have a stupid thing on the news this morning about government officials messing up traffic on purpose on a bridge, and some dumb thing about, I think, sports players getting scared by their own mascot. I mean, that was on the news this morning when I was having breakfast. I think there's more important things to have on the news than that. And these people, as far as causing a traffic jam on a bridge, that's the kind of mindset of about an 8-year-old. It's also something that I would have learned when I was 8 years old, that you don't do stuff like that because it inconveniences other people. You don't do those kind of things because you wouldn't like it if you were in that traffic jam. It's just that simple. There's some other gorgeous artwork made by a person that was kind of at the mid-level on the autism spectrum. All right, now I'm going to tell you, math people, why you need to have us art minds. One of the things that really worries me, with all the STEM emphasis, and we're going to have algebra now. How could I get through college with algebra? And how I got through college? Because thank goodness for the educational fads of 1967. And in 1967, the required math class was finite math. Probability, matrices, and statistics. Bit more visual, tons of tutoring. I managed to get through it. But the engineering mind does need the art mind, because I've learned there's certain things the engineering mind doesn't see. Now, what's there? I don't know if that came from, I don't know where, it's got a satellite image. I don't know if it's Google's or not. I did get that off the internet. I certainly wasn't going to fly over it and get my own picture of the Fukushima nuclear power plant. Not something you want to get very, very near, that's for sure. Because sometimes the most obvious is the least obvious. So I was getting all these newspapers, all this stuff, and reading about it on the plane because I find this stuff interesting. And when I found out why this happened, I'm going, how could you do this? I can't design a nuclear reactor. There's no way. But if I had been drawing the concrete work for the plant and doing my side elevation drawings, there's no way I would have made the mistake they made. All I have to know about a nuclear reactor is if the emergency pump fails to work after you've scrammed it, see, it doesn't quite get turned off all the way, it burns up and you're in so much trouble it's not funny. That's all I have to know about it. Well, okay, earthquake broke all the power lines and everything. There's no electric power to run the main stuff, so they had to scram it. And what happened is the emergency generators that ran the emergency equipment were in a non-waterproof basement. How could you make a mistake that basic? Now, when I was young, I used to think, well, stupidity. No. I found the mathematical mind doesn't see it. I could see the water smashing out the baby blue louvers. This plant was painted baby blue of all colors with little clouds on the top of the boxes, make it look innocent and pretty. See those baby blue louvers getting busted out, and 2 seconds later, those big generators, all the electric panels underwater. And it's not going to work. There's no way I would have done that. I mean, I would have been going to every shipbuilding company that there was. I said, I want catalogs on all your waterproof doors. I want to try out all your waterproof doors. I want to find waterproof doors that are really easy to open. Don't have to have training to open and close them. Close really tight, obvious when they're closed. And it wouldn't have happened. This is why you really need all the different kinds of minds. I've been thinking about a lot of other things too. You see, because I can visualize ways that it can break. Especially anything, mechanical sort of stuff. Okay, Steve Jobs went to college and he audited a calligraphy class, which he didn't pay for. But it really influenced the computing, and all the computers have nice fonts as a result of that. And he was an artist. He developed the interface for the phones. Oh, and I know there's a lot of bad blood going on, but the lawsuits, I read all about that. Steve wanted to go thermonuclear on Android. I know all about that kind of stuff. But again, I can only talk about the dead ones. So that's the reason why I have these slides. But the point, one of the points I'm trying to get across is he wasn't an engineer. This is where you need to have the art mind and the engineering minds working together on projects. They have complementary skills. Well, there's a big debate right now that maybe humanities programs are just useless in colleges. I was at a state about 2 years ago that will remain nameless, but their governor said they wanted to charge extra tuition at the state university for humanities classes. And so in the Chronicle of Higher Education, David Barish said that the connection between Steve Jobs and so-called useless humanities programs, such as calligraphy, cannot be ignored. Now, one thing about calligraphy is it's a hands-on class. You actually have to do it. And there is a need for humanities. I thought this was really interesting. You want evidence-based, science, the premier journal, that when students read serious literary fiction, helps them with some of their social skills, rather than just reading the latest Stephen King or something like that, or Michael Crichton. I have to say those kind of books I like when I'm on a long airplane flight and it's really boring. Okay, some of the other work I've done with livestock was to look at the things that they're scared of. Okay, they're going up a chute in a strange place, meat plant, for example. They were afraid of a lot of little things. Shadows, reflections, chains hanging down, seeing people standing up ahead. Things that we tend to not notice. And if you take those distractions out, maybe change a light to get rid of a reflection, add a light because they don't like going to a dark hole, then they would move through the chute more easily, especially when it was in a strange place. Now, how many people here noticed this animal is locked onto that sunbeam like radar? Raise your hand if you notice that. Okay, we're doing pretty good here. JPL a little bit better than here. Well, see, that's purely the visual thinking sort of stuff. Well, I know there's some people interested in animal issues, so I think I'll talk a little bit about some of the things I've done. When I was young, I used to think I could fix everything with equipment. If I could just build the right magic system, everything would be perfect. What I found is equipment's only half the equation. The other half is management, and management wanting to do things right. Now, I have a saying, heat softens steel. And then people like me who want to reform things can now shape it and bend it into pretty grill work. And when McDonald's back in 1997 decided they were going to do something about bad stuff going on in slaughterhouses, that resulted in a lot of change. And it was my job to implement it. And I came up with a very simple scoring system. There was like traffic rules for slaughterhouses. And if you didn't follow certain rules and make certain numbers, you failed the McDonald's audit. 95% of the cattle dead on the first shot, or you fail the audit. You got to get them all dead before you hang them up. Only 3 animals are allowed to moo and beller in the stunning area. Only 1% falling. And if you want a real excellent score, only 5% can get hit with the electric prod if you want excellent score. Simple, very simple. You see, these are outcome measures. I'm not telling you how to build the plant. They are very simple outcome measures. And it worked because it was very objective and very, very, very simple. When big customers say that something's got to be changed, then things are going to be changed. Walmart has just come out with a big statement that came out with 2 days ago on putting video cameras in swine houses to make sure people aren't, beating the pigs up with gate rods or throwing the piglets or doing some other, really nasty thing like that. I'm sure you've all seen that show, Undercover Boss. I think that's a great show. I saw those kind of boss's eyes opened up moments when took some of the executives from some of the large hamburger restaurants on their first trips to farms and slaughterhouses. I remember the day, and this was back in 1999 or 1998, around that time, when one of the executives saw a half-dead dairy cow go into the product. Boy, that was a real undercover boss moment. I'd like to do another show called Undercover Legislature. Well, Okay, let's take people that do things like deliberately cause traffic jams. And we've got a real special trailer set up for him. Oh, it's about 10 miles from the local Walmart. And we're going to drop him off there. He'll just have his license and his wallet. That's all. There'll be a $50 debit card on the counter, a Walmart pin, a couple of beans on the shelf, this much gas in the car. Okay, you report to work tomorrow at Walmart. You're going to be there for 2 months. And we've taken away your medical insurance card. You know, let's get them get a taste of, what some people are actually up against. Now, living in a total rarefied world. Now, look at how the horse and the zebra put an ear on each other. And then the other ear is on me. Watch. Animals, it's all about details. All about details. Well, there's what the entrance to a slaughter plant looks like. In fact, I saw your great Google Earth thing there. I think I'll go Google Earth a few of my jobs. That's always fun. And I'll show this slide to my students, and I'll say, okay, now tell me what I could improve here. What is bad here? Well, one thing that's good is inside the tunnel, I got white translucent plastic, so they're not going into a dark hole. But the bad thing is, and I'd say about half my students don't notice it, is you got 3 people standing right where they should not be standing. Again, sometimes the most obvious is the least obvious. Now, there's evidence that in the normal human brain, language covers up art and mathematics, because it's a type of Alzheimer's that when the language parts of the brain get wrecked, art comes out for about 3 or 4 years. And when Van Gogh was painting Starry Night, I don't think he realized he was putting mathematics in it. And there's going to be a new book coming out on a guy who got in a bar fight and got bashed on the head. And now he's a mathematician studying physics. Sort of got his inner mathematician turned loose. There's a lot of things that we don't know about the brain. Now, an important thing, understanding someone who thinks the way I do, is I'm a bottom-up thinker. My approach to things, my same approach on developing equipment for livestock, was to go around and look at all of the state of the art. Okay, you go download you get all the patents, so I couldn't download them when I was doing it. We had to write to the patent office and get them. It was a real pain. But you get all the patents, you get all the state of the art, go around, visit all these places, and try to get the good ideas, chuck out the bad ideas. In other words, it's bottom-up thinking rather than top-down. Where today what's happening, especially in government stuff, too much top-down. Very vague things. But concepts are formed by specific examples. Now, as a young child, cats and dogs, okay, all the cat pictures in this file, all the dog pictures in this file. Well, when I was very young, I could sort cats from dogs by size until our next-door neighbors got a dachshund. Okay, now I can no longer use size as a visual criterion for a cat versus dog. So then I noticed they all had the same nose shape if they were dogs. So that was a visual feature that every dog has got. Everything's learned by specific example. So how do I learn what being nice or being bad is? Well, my mother would just correct me. If I got to say please, well, say please, that's nice behavior. You wait politely in line at the movie theater. That's nice behavior. You want to teach something like up or down. You've got to use a lot of different examples. Because there's some kids with autism where if you say put the in, it just goes in the garbage. They need to learn that it could be put the in the drawer, in the cupboard, in something else, not necessarily in the garbage can. So up can walk up the stairs. I lifted up a cup. The plane flew up in the air. A lot of different examples. My thinking is associative, just like how a search engine works. So if I'm at the Chicago airport, there quite often, okay, I'll look at that. Now I can start looking through Google for images in my head, a glass structure category, start going through that. Or I could start off in an airport category. There are no generalized pictures. This was something that when I was kind of really a breakthrough in my thinking when I did the church steeple as my question rather than house or car. Something that people weren't quite so familiar with. Okay, glass structure, biosphere in Arizona, Crystal Palace, greenhouse at Colorado State. Now when I'm on this subject, I'm seeing our building that's now under construction. Now I'm seeing other buildings that were under construction, and the contractors used up 25 of our super valuable parking spaces for their trailers. Okay, so that's how I got from glass structures to contractor trailers. It was a real sore point with me. I wasn't home when they did that. I think I would have walked out there like I owned the place, told them to move the trailers. But once they got established, then you're just stuck with it. Did they ask permission to put those trailers there? I'm sure they did not. Okay, airport category. Now, when you think about really big amounts of money, let's start thinking about it in something the public can understand. This is worth $5 billion. And they're building a new light rail in a new west, and I got to get the price for that because that's going to be quite a lot more than $5 billion when that's done. But if we start thinking about some of these big amounts of money in something real like airport units, then people could kind of really put it in perspective. So you got Denver Airport, Dallas-Fort Worth, Minneapolis, Atlanta. Then you got the old grungy old terminal at LaGuardia. And it'd be fun to explore that place. And when I asked an astrophysicist about the church steeples, he saw a motion of people singing and praying. I go, oh, wow, trippy. That is definitely not my mind. Now, cattle will make a category. If they get used to being handled by a man on a horse, they've learned that's safe. The first time they see the man on the ground, they panic. You see, it's different. It's a different picture. I've learned the man on the horse is safe. Man on the ground is new and scary. I can also learn that man on the ground is safe. But that's something totally novel. See, most people wouldn't think the man on the ground was something novel. Now, I find when you're trying to categorize problems, and a lot of people have trouble categorizing where's a problem coming from. Okay, if I got something wrong in a factory, is there something wrong with the equipment or something wrong with how people are operating that equipment? I find people often don't make that differentiation. If it's an equipment problem, is it a glitch? Of course, if it's a meat plant, and I've done a lot of work with them, stuck trolley, or is it a fundamental design problem? They don't make that differentiation. I've got a problem with a kid in school. Does he have a biological problem? Like maybe his tummy hurts so much that he can't pay attention in school. Or does he just not want to do the work, it's just strictly behavior? Top-down thinkers tend to overgeneralize, especially when they're not doing practical things anymore. Well, I got this out of one of the tech magazines about dog fooding. You got to use the stuff that you make. Then you really find out if it actually works. Policymakers need to be directly experience the consequences of their policies. And if you want to mess up traffic and cause a traffic jam, then you need to be stuck in the middle of the worst traffic jam. Well, there are the guys up at JPL. It was very cool to get to meet them. Kind of unconventional. It's okay to be eccentric. That's okay. Some of the most creative people are really, really eccentric. They're doing marvelous things. And in talking to the public, we need to tell the public, well, what are some of the spin-offs from maybe some of the JPL stuff? Not stuff from the 60s. That's ancient history. Let's look at inventions in the last 10 or 15 years. How about the active pixel center, the sensor? That's the heart of the cell phone camera. How about coding that's involved that will help one cell phone tower to work from one cell phone tower to another cell phone tower? How about a mass spectrometer that's big? Yeah, we have a mass spectrometer that's the size of a giant desk. Well, you can put a sample in that and it'll tell you what chemicals in it. Well, that would have a lot of really good, useful uses. Now, I was more interested in looking at pictures of things than pictures of people. But we need people interested in things, because the social yakety-yaks aren't going to solve some of the energy problems and stuff like that. Let's help some of the kids that are different. I don't care if they're labeled gifted, they're labeled quirky, weird, nerds, or mild autism. One thing you got to do with these kids when they're young is you got to stretch them just outside of their comfort zone. And the other thing is we need to be learning job skills. That needs to start at age 12. We need to find paper route substitutes, things like walking dogs for the neighbors, things like maybe setting up chairs at the community center, something like that. One place where all my teachers and everybody drew a line, I wasn't allowed to become a recluse in my room. That was absolutely not allowed. I had to get out and do things. Kids aren't doing free play, which teaches valuable social skills. Dogs need to do this too when they're young. Because if dogs don't do this when they're young, Man, they fight other dogs really viciously because they never learned how to get along. Taking out the hands-on classes is the worst thing the schools ever did. They took out cooking, sewing, woodworking, machine shop, welding. We have a shortage of skilled trades. I mean, JPL needs people to make the wheels and stuff for the Mars lander. Oh, there's something really cool and really geeky about the wheels of Curiosity. I'm going to just let you figure it out. I don't know if I'm supposed to tell you or not, but it's so geeky and anti-suit, it's just really, really cool. But they need to have those machinists. You know, it's not going to work without them. The other thing that's bad about taking out hands-on classes is we're losing resourceful problem solving. Even something as simple as, with cooking, you're missing an ingredient, can you do it with another ingredient? Of course, in the 50s, girls were taught sewing, so I had a wonderful toy sewing machine when I was in 4th grade. And I remember one project where I cut the fabric wrong and I ruined it. It was like I got in a rush. Some of the things you learn from doing hands-on things. This is the stuff that saved me. These were things that were refuges away from teasing. Kids that did the teasing were not interested in woodworking or interested in riding horses. I was also an Estes model rocketer. I loved model rockets. I was in the Model Rocket Club. And I was horrified to go on the Estes website about a month ago, and you can buy a ready-made rocket. That is disgusting. The whole point is to build them. And I made a few points with the other kids when I made a rocket to look like our headmaster, a Mr. Patey rocket. And he was aerodynamically stable and he flew. I didn't do very much studying, but I was in a special boarding school for gifted kids with a lot of emotional problems. And instead of studying, I was remodeling our ski-tail house. But the headmaster let me do that because I was learning work skills. And a lot of these kids are not learning work skills. I cleaned a lot of horse stalls, too, when I was 15. Lots and lots of them. And I was responsible for the horse barn and making sure I always closed the feed box. Got to always close the grain box because horse dies if it eats out of the grain box. You've got to close it. I think we need to limit screen time little kids. The thing that I'm finding with electronics and really little kids is, little kids want to play with electronics, but we need to get that teacher in there and get them taking turns. These kids have got to learn how to take turns. Well, I think we need to start making connections, physical connections, between the virtual world and the real world. And one really enterprising mom, she went to the lumberyard, got some 2x4s cut up, and then she brought them all home to the driveway and had the kids paint them to make Minecraft blocks in the driveway. In other words, linking the online world to the real world. Then her autistic kid had lots of friends coming over to play with the Minecraft blocks. Activities with animals. Get kids involved in activities they can do with other kids. 4-H, FFA, robotics clubs, MakerBot, and 3D printing clubs. Get them involved in these things. My ability in art was always encouraged. We need to be working on building up the area of strength. The kid can be good at math, let them do more advanced classes. Use fixations to motivate. Great online sources. Now, I was reading that on Udacity or some of these things like this, that only like 4% of the people took the entire class. I don't consider that a failure. Because there's an awful lot of people that might want to just look at some programming stuff and just take a couple of lessons to learn something needed for work. Because back when I was doing hydraulic stuff all the time, I had all these books for hydraulics. And I didn't need algebra because I had all these tables for things like fluid flow. Looked it up on the tables. And when I first started out, I took the first book, and I did read the first book pretty well, but I didn't read all the books. I used them as reference books. I think the thing they need to look at is how many of those people that went on Udacity took a few lessons as a reference, and it helped them in their work. I think that's something that needs to be looked at. But I show this to a lot of parents that they don't realize there's a lot of free stuff out there. And we've got to do something about rural internet access. It is beyond awful. You cannot play videos, and you go out in the rural areas, you still get the mom and pop DVD stores because they don't have movies otherwise. It's just that simple. It is atrocious. Well, there's the optical illusion room. I got fixated on that, and the movie did a nice job of showing me making it. And there's one of my designs in SketchUp. I know you don't own it anymore, but it's a great, I've seen some really great things going on with teenage kids doing SketchUp, and then they're printing their stuff out with 3D printers. Really, really cool stuff. And I really liked this warning they had on the MakerBot website. You need patience. Yeah, this kind of fiddly little machine. Get mad at it, you're going to break it. Know-how and a sense of adventure required. I really liked that thing they wrote on the website. Yeah, you don't design it right, your little thing's going to collapse and goo. You know, you're getting back to the real world. The other thing on something like this, people say, well, they can't afford that. Okay, it's $1,500, $2,000. Look at all the money it's getting spent on sports. That's the price of one Major League football uniform. That's all it costs, maybe 2 high school uniforms. It's not very much money. I don't want to hear that. Well, that's just a kind of neat little thing they made. And this is some views through the Brock Magiscope, a great little, really durable little child's microscope. It's $150. No fiddly mirror. Very easy for kids to use. You don't have a glass slide in it. And I was so happy to go to the Gifted conference. It wasn't the Autism conference. I wish this had been at the Autism conference. It was at the Gifted conference. And they had a hotel room about the size of this. And all these kids, they'd put the electronics away, and they were playing with the Brock Magiscope, and they were looking at pond scum and leaves, and I thought, oh, that's really cool. Well, I just got to show people. I mean, you guys know about this stuff that's on the internet, but I do a lot of talks at a lot of places, and I just want to give people ideas of cool things that are out there. There's some evidence that kids learning to write sometimes can help them on reading. On learning reading, maybe you turn off all the bells and whistles and use the plain e-book, maybe just with still pictures, and you have them read to them. And they're learning a story better. And again, this is refereed scientific stuff. We're going evidence-based here. Well, people need to touch to perceive. I had a really good time over at Pixar. They found that sometimes they got to get them off their computers and get them actually drawing. And when they print their figurines out on their 3D printer, they put them around the computer mouse so they can touch them. Got to touch to see. Got to do that. Science teacher. Boy, did he help me out. Well, he was a NASA space scientist. Was he an accredited teacher? No. No stupid ed courses for him. We got to get back to doing real things in this country. That's what we got to do. You know, one thing a lot of employers want today is, you know, students know how to work. This came up in a lot of things. I learned to sell my work, not myself. Also, in working with some of the people that are different, you don't take that employee and go, well, just develop some new software. You want to say, okay, I want to make an app for the Android phone, and it does this specific thing. It uses this language, this memory. You don't tell them how to do it, but it's got certain parameters. Then, okay, that's easy to do. And when mistakes are made, the boss needs to just pull them aside and say, pull them in the office quietly, no yelling and screaming, and say, well, you know, we had the project meeting last week, and you called Jim a jerk in front of the other 5 colleagues. That's not the Google way of doing things. Just don't do that. And I learned you can get some people that will sabotage a project due to jealousy. That was very, very difficult for me to deal with. And then you get other people where they just think differently. You know, you kind of differentiate between the two. Well, if I was in a plant, one of my meat plant projects, and the plant engineer's sitting like this, I was hired by the manager. He didn't like this weird geek coming in on his turf. I would kind of pull him into the project. And that oftentimes stopped that. Okay, tour guide. Great job for 12-year-olds. You know, you got to demonstrate the correct distance to get from the visitor. Demonstrate the correct greeting. It's just like coaching somebody in a foreign country. And there's sensory issues. Some people just can't stand a lot of noise, can't stand 60-cycle fluorescent lights. You get a lot of sensory issues, and they can vary from being very mild to being very severe. This needs to be researched on how to treat some of these problems. When I was a little kid, loud sounds hurt my ears. I still absolutely hate the vacuum toilets in airplanes. If I'd had to deal with those when I was 5, I would have been sure I'd be sucked out of the airplane. My visual thinking mind went wild when I was like 6 years old, and they were remodeling our house. They had this big circular saw, and somehow I was afraid that maybe its blade would come up through the floor of my room, which is like ludicrous. But when you're maybe 6 years old, it wasn't quite so ludicrous. I had trouble hearing hard consonant sounds, so my speech teacher slowed down and enunciated the hard consonants. She'd say cup, and then she'd say kappa. Slow down, enunciate it, so then I could hear it. Tension shifting. I have problems with this. Somebody rings a cell phone off, I orient, takes me much longer to shift back. Tension shifting slowness. Some people, when they go to read, the print will jiggle on the page. That's probably about 10% of students that are having some trouble in college. Doesn't explain all autism, it doesn't explain all dyslexia. But there's something wrong with the circuits back here, shape, color, motion, texture. They're not merging together right. And sometimes they can be fixed with a very simple thing, like pale pink glasses, pale lavender glasses, different print your work on some different colored papers, maybe try different background colors on the computer screen, different fonts. Now, wouldn't it be stupid to lose a job or flunk out of school because you didn't do this? I'm finding 1 out of 50's got this problem in my livestock handling class because they do really horrible on my drawing assignment. They cannot draw. If I say draw this, they're drawing, that's what they draw. They don't say it. Well, there's my head. Well, and that's all the white matter that's inside the, and the gray matter. This is not lining up right. Something got changed here. There should be a little space there for the gray matter. Something got out of sync there on that. And that's all the circuits, and those you can actually, that are the cable bundles, that are the inter-office communication. That's where you have differences in a developmental problem. Well, my fear center was bigger than normal. You know, so, well, that's controlled now with antidepressant medication. Little Prozac, us visual thinkers, panic monsters. I know a lot of visual thinkers where a little dab of Prozac in the morning, or Lexapro or Zoloft, stops the anxiety. Then you're not getting whacked out on drugs and alcohol. Cerebellum's smaller, so I've got really bad balance. You know, simple accommodations in the workplace. Some people have got to get away from the 60-cycle fluorescent lights. They need a quiet place to work. Open office plan, and I got to do serious writing. Doesn't work. The other thing that doesn't work with people that are kind of on the autism spectrum is the sudden change in work routine. They come into work and they just go, okay, we're yanking out all the office cubicles today and we're going to move them. Okay, if we're going to do that, let's have some warning, maybe a week at least of warning. And I still can't tolerate scratchy clothes. Scratchy clothes just horrible, like sandpaper. Some cotton itches, other cotton doesn't itch. Now the thing is, it's okay for geeks to cry. When the space shuttle got shut down, there were a lot of people crying on 60 Minutes. And I got thrown out of a large girls' school for throwing a book at a girl who teased me. And when I went to boarding school, I got in a fist fight in the cafeteria after a guy had called me some name. And they took horseback riding away for 2 weeks. I still had to clean the barn, but no horseback riding. And somehow I switched to crying. It's okay for geeks to cry. That's perfectly okay. And I would go and hide in the electrical room because the tech companies don't tolerate any violence. I have to say that it made me chuckle to look in the clean room at JPL, and here's this big, giant Craftsman tool chest there. To think that bolts on the Marslander were tightened by a tool kept in a Craftsman tool chest. But you better not throw that tool. Otherwise, it's bye-bye job. It's that simple. It takes a village to raise a child. We got to figure out how we can all work together to make things work. Because I'm seeing too many smart kids going down the wrong road. You know, I go to the gifted meeting, he's going down one road. I go to the autism meeting, and you've got one situation where a kid that ought to be headed for Google is put in a class with kids that don't talk. Then I go to another school system, and he's headed in the right direction really beautifully. It's very, very, very variable. But these two silos don't talk. Because if I look at the book table for the gifted meeting and the autism meeting, there might be a 5% overlap in the books. There should be more like a 25% overlap in the books. They're not talking to each other. We got to get people together. You know, as I say, one geek goes to Google in Silicon Valley, maybe JPL. There's another geek that goes to Hollywood and that stuff. And unfortunately, there's a brilliant geek that is going to the basement, play video games for 10 hours a day, and he gets Social Security for it. That's not where I want him going. No, we've got to like reach out, get to these kids, and you know what? We got to hook them in middle school. Middle school is where we got to hook them. And some states now are putting skilled trades back in. Okay, I think that kind of finishes up what I have to say, but I got time for questions. Always like to do some questions.
I'm curious, over the course of your career, you've shared a lot of the insights you had about the experience of animals in slaughterhouses. I'm curious about what kinds of things you learned over your career, like where maybe you can look back on some of your earlier work and see like, oh, this is what I understand so much more deeply now.
Well, there's a lot of things. I mean, for one thing, in the 70s, my first professional group was the American Society of Agricultural Engineering. I thought I could fix the world with engineering. I absolutely believe that everything can be fixed with engineering. I now realize only half of it can be fixed with engineering. And I had a major equipment failure, which was a real epiphany. I was hired by a company in 1980 to the old slaughter plants. The pigs had to walk up to the 3rd floor in the real old plants. And they wanted me to build a conveyor system to put in the floor of the chute that takes pigs up this ramp. And I said, I'll design that. Well, the problem is it flipped all the pigs over backwards. And it did not work, and we had to tear it out. But then I started realizing, now why are some pigs not capable of walking up this ramp? Well, I started getting the ID numbers off of the different pigs. And I found out that all the pigs that had a problem came from one farm. And they had a genetic problem called spraddle leg, where the hips are very, very weak. What I should have done by trying to make a conveyor, that was treating a symptom of a problem. We should have gone back to the source for a fraction of the cost of this mess that we had. We could have bought that farm new bores, like 5 or 6 new bores, all it would have taken, just a few $1,000s, and gotten rid of that genetic problem, would have solved it. One thing I learned from that is you've got to treat the problem at its source rather than treating a symptom of a problem. Now, I went into about a 6-month depression over that. That was not fun. But I learned a really important lesson from that.
Thank you.
So we're out of time now, so please everybody join me in thanking Temple Grandin for coming to Google.